the Torah begins to list all the holidays. What's surprising about all the holidays is that the first holiday that the Torah mentions is Shabbat. So Shabbat is a holiday. You don't do any work. You rest on Shabbat. Shabbat is a holiday. The problem is that really Shabbat doesn't fit into the pattern of the holidays, because if you think about it, there's a very big difference between Shabbat and the other holidays. And the main difference is the question of who determines the holiday, or who determines the date. And this is very interesting, because we're not used to this in the way we live our lifestyle, because of the temple, biblically speaking, the only way you can set the calendar is by the people citing the new moon. And when you cite the new moon, that's the new month. What that means in simple English is there is no calendar. There's no set calendar. We don't know when the next holiday is gonna come. It depends on when the people actually determine and set the date. So, for example, before Passover, 2 weeks before Passover, the people would have to go outside, cite the moon. If they cite the moon, they would the witnesses would go to the high court, and the high court would say, okay, today is the 1st of Nisan, which means Passover is in 2 weeks, which means that you can't make any bookings or reservations for Passover in advance, because you're not even sure exactly what day Passover will be. So all the holidays were determined by the people. In fact, if you read the verses, so I'm looking at Leviticus chapter 23. Hashem speaks to Moshe, and he says, chapter 23, verse 2, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, Moedei Hashem, the appointed times of God. Moed is a holiday. The appointed times of God, and this is the key, Asher tikru'u otam mikra'ei kodesh, that you will call them and make them holy. Meaning to say, who decides what's Passover, who decides when Shavuot is? It all depends on the people. That's the holidays. Shabbat is very different. Who decides when is Shabbat? It's not up to the people, it's up to God. Every seventh day is Shabbat, regardless of what the people do or do not do. So it's two different patterns. In fact, if you look at the liturgy on Shabbat, both in the Kiddush, when we sanctify the day in the beginning of the holiday, and in all the prayers, there's a difference between the way we describe the holiness of Shabbat and the way we describe the holiness of the holidays. So when it comes to Shabbat, we say, Mekadesh HaShabbat. God, we thank you, God. Blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies Shabbat. Why do we say that? Because God is the one who sanctifies Shabbat. When it comes to the holidays, we don't say that. We don't say, blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies the Shabbat, the holidays, because God doesn't sanctify the holidays. The people sanctify the holidays. So what do we say? We say, blessed are you, Lord, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Thank you, God, who sanctifies Israel and the times, and the appointed times and the holidays. So the Talmud says, what's the meaning of this blessing? God, we say, thank you, God, for sanctifying Israel, and Israel sanctifies the times. In other words, God does not sanctify the time directly. God sanctifies the times indirectly. Because directly, God only sanctifies the people, and the people sanctify the time. So why am I saying this? Why am I talking about this? The real question is, why is Shabbat listed in the holidays? It seems like it's a different category. So there are multiple interpretations. I'm going to say one. One interpretation is as follows. Oh, so the commentaries explain, the Hasidic commentaries explain as follows. They explain that one of the things that the holidays do is the holidays reinforce the message of Shabbat. What do I mean by that? So what is the, you have to go back to explain the concept that there are, in the 10 Commandments, there are 2 mentions of the 10 Commandments in the Torah. They're described in the 2nd book of the Torah as well as in the 5th book of the Torah when it's reiterated. And when we celebrate Shabbat, the reason given is different in both places. In the first book, it says that the reason why we celebrate Shabbat is because God created the world. And the second mention in the fifth book, it says the reason why we celebrate Shabbat is because God took us out of Egypt. So there are multiple ways of talking about this, but one way to think about it is as follows. When we look at the miracle that happens, the holidays, and most of the holidays or all the holidays are really reminding us of the Exodus of Egypt. So what's the Exodus of Egypt? Exodus of Egypt teaches us that miracles can happen. So the fact that now we're celebrating the miracle. That's what miracles, that's what the miracle does. That's what the holiday does. It allows us to focus and celebrate the possibility of miracles. Now, what does a miracle teach us? So in some sense, what the miracle teaches us is that God is the creator of the world. In other words, the miracle tells us not so much about the miracle, but the miracle tells us about nature. In other words, had there been no miracles, if everything is always perfect according to prediction, if everything is always by expectation, then there's a mistake. The person could make a mistake and say, God didn't create the world. The world has always been here. There's nothing new, and things happen by themselves, and there's no creator. But once you say there is a miracle, in other words, the unexpected happens. In other words, God could intervene. So that tells you that the world itself, the creation itself, is a creation of God. And because it was created by God, therefore God could interfere and God could change. So in other words, if Shabbat celebrates the nature, and holidays celebrate miracles, the unexpected. So Shabbat, we focus on God creating the world, which is celebrating natural phenomenon, and the holidays celebrate the unexpected, the fact that we could change, the fact that we can become free, the fact that we can grow. This is unexpected. So now what the Torah is telling us, these are not two separate themes, they're interrelated. When we celebrate a miracle, we then look back and say, you know something, that means nature itself is also a creation. Because the possibility of nature, of a miracle, teaches us that creation itself that the world itself, nature itself, is in fact a creation. It's not a constant. So that is the idea of just explaining why Shabbat fits into the pattern here. And once we do that, we can move on and start talking about the specific holidays. And I have a specific bias. I want to talk a little bit about the counting of the Omer, because the counting of the 7 weeks between the Passover and Shavuot, because that's exactly what we're doing today. We do it every day. So that's also listed in this parasha. Amongst the holidays is also the lead up to the holiday of Shavuot. So hopefully with God's help, we'll mention something about the counting of the Omer as well.
That's a good way. Teacher.
Okay, so what's happening here is as follows. Let's talk about the holidays for a minute. And I spoke about this in past years, but it's too sweet not to mention again. So those who heard it, I apologize. I'll try to stay under 3-4 minutes on this. So let's think about the dates of the holidays. Passover and Sukkot are on the 15th day of the Jewish calendar, of the Hebrew calendar, I should say. 15th day of the Hebrew month. If you go on to Greenwich Avenue and you ask somebody, if there's anybody there, I'm not sure, and say what's the state of the moon tonight? Is it going to be a full moon or half moon or no moon at all? They won't know what you're talking about. They're not sure what you're talking about. But every Jewish kid knows exactly what the state of the moon is, because if it's day 15, it means it's a full moon. If it's day 29, it means there's no moon. If it's day 6 or 7 or 8, there's a half a moon. So it's very clear. So just by knowing the date, you know the state of the moon. Now, we are fascinated by the moon because the Talmud says that the Jewish people are likened to the moon, and therefore they tell time, they count their time by the moon. So we like the moon. The moon is maybe not as glorious as the sun, maybe not as powerful as the sun, not as consistent as the sun, but we like the concept of rebirth. In other words, it waxes, it wanes, we have difficulties, we have times of revelation, we have times of concealment, but it's very hopeful because even if you don't see the moon tonight, you know it's going to reappear tomorrow. And when it reappears, it's something new. It could evolve into something completely different. And in that sense, we're fascinated by the moon. So let's think about the holidays for a minute. So if you think about the holidays, you have 2 holidays. That's Passover and and Sukkot, where we sit in the moon, where the holiday is celebrated on the 15th day of the Hebrew month, where the moon is complete. Then we have the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is day one of the first day of the month. It's the only holiday that appears on the first day of the month. The first of the month is Rosh Hashanah, the New Year. Now, the New Year, there is very little light, in some cases no light, there's very little moon, in some cases no moon at all. And then you have Shavuot, which is coming up, which is the holiday that commemorates the giving of the Torah. That is, you get a half a moon. Seventh day of the month, you get a half a moon. So what is it so important with the moon, where the moon is? Why is it so important? If you think about it, just anytime you're going to your Seder and the Passover Seder, and you look up, you'll see a full moon. If it's not a full moon, it's probably cloudy. But Passover night is going to be a full moon, and Shavuot and Rosh Hashanah night, there's going to be no moon at all. Maybe a sliver, but probably no moon at all. So what does this all represent? So it represents as follows. The story of the Jewish people and God is a story of a romance, of a relationship, where there's the bride, which is the Jewish people, and then there's the groom, which is God, man and woman, God and the Jewish people. And as always, as any good love story, there's ups and downs, and there's disagreements, and there's tension. And the holidays is really, in other words, tracking the relationship of God and the Jewish people gives us insight into human relationships as well. So if you ask yourself, so I like to say, I'm in a relationship and we got into a fight and I offended my spouse and my spouse offended me, and I'm very reasonable. So I'm perfectly comfortable apologizing. I have no problem apologizing. I only have one condition. I want the other person to apologize first. If you apologize first, I'm willing to apologize after you. I have no problem. I'm very accepting, right? So the real question is, I always know I did something wrong. The other person did something wrong. Let them take the first step. And of course, the other person is waiting for the other person to take the first step. And then it's not only for a fight. Let's say, okay, it's time to decide where we're going to go on vacation. So I'm not interested in booking and choosing the place to go. It's too many choices. Let the other one take the first move. Let the other one will decide where we'll go. And the other spouse says, you know what? I don't have to choose the restaurant. I'm tired of choosing the restaurant. Let the other one choose the restaurant. And if that's what happens, we both stay home. In other words, there's no movement. In other words, this is just two silly examples, but it's a real question. So the real question is, who takes the first step? Who's taking the initiative? Who sees it as their responsibility to take the initiative in this relationship? And it can manifest in all areas. This is just two examples. And the answer is that in a healthy relationship, practically speaking, usually what happens is one party takes the initiative. But that's not a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship is that there's some dynamic where both parties have opportunity to take the initiative. If you're the only one taking the initiative, I'm just a recipient, that's not a mature relationship. We each have to take the first step. And the same is true with our relationship with God. And the holidays mirror this dimension. In other words, when does God take the first step? When do I take? When do the people take the first step? So I have a problem. When do I expect God to step in and inspire me and solve my problems? And when do I have to call out to God? And the answer is, like in any good relationship, both are true. So, both are true. So, Passover is a time where the Jewish people did not really do anything. The Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt. They were not only physically oppressed, but also spiritually oppressed. The Talmud says that the Jewish people were idol worshippers. They were not spiritually enlightened. And they were all around, they weren't in the best situation. Yet what happens? God swoops in, right? Like the knight with shining armor. God swoops in and he pulls them out of Egypt. What did they do? They did nothing. And that is a wonderful thing. You're in a relationship and somebody comes in and helps you and does something for you, and it's very inspiring. 6 months later, what happens? 6 months later is Rosh Hashanah. What happens in Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah, what does the Torah tell you about Rosh Hashanah? It tells you nothing. What it tells you is, you sound the shofar. What does the shofar mean? You call to God. In other words, don't expect God to come and inspire you. Don't expect God to come and uplift you. Now it's your responsibility. You turn to God. In other words, God says, I'm happy to have this relationship, but I'm tired of calling you. Now it's your turn to call me. And that's exactly what Rosh Hashanah is. We pick up the shofar and we call God. And that's a dimension where the people have to inspire themselves and the people have to move themselves closer to God, which is the concept of repentance, of teshuvah. I decide I want to become close to God. It's the concept of why we come gather in shul. We hire a cantor, we may sing songs, we try to inspire ourselves. Again, all of this is the people moving close to God. Passover, it doesn't happen. Passover, the inspiration comes from above. The Kabbalists even explain that even the Passover is in the spring. And if you think about the spring, on a beautiful day like today, I mean, I wouldn't mind if it was maybe 8 degrees warmer, but even not, a day like today, you go outside, it's hard not to be in a good mood, right? The spring itself has a certain energy of joy that the universe is calling out to you. God is calling out to you. This is like God coming into Egypt and inspiring you. Even just the natural setting of the world. 6 months later, moving into the fall, it's much more depressing. Oh, now you have to inspire yourself. And finally, we have the middle holiday, the holiday of Shavuot, where we get the Torah. Oh, over here, it's the marriage. And the marriage is the partnership. Both do a little bit. God comes and gives us the Torah. However, we prepared for receiving of the Torah. We counted 7 weeks, as we will discuss. We tried to prepare and refine ourselves. And now we're worthy of receiving the Torah. So who takes the first step? In this case, it's both. Let's go back to the moon. Passover, when we do nothing, it means it's a full moon. What does a full moon mean? We're the Jewish people. We're the moon. We reflect the light of God. A full moon represents that the light of the sun is fully present within the moon. So there's light coming from the sun. God is shining on the people. God is doing all the heavy lifting. What is Rosh Hashanah? There's no light coming from the sun. The moon has to inspire itself. We have to call to God. We have to call to God. Therefore, there's no moon on the first day, or very little of the moon. There's a little bit, but it's not. There's no light, no significant light presence. And then, what is the concept of Shavuot, the holiday of the giving of the Torah, where God gives us the Torah, but we have prepared, so we're worthy. We're in tune. Oh, now there's a half moon. Half moon represents there is some light coming from above. But then there's some light, there's some space where there is no light from above, where we're called upon to elevate ourselves. And that's the healthy relationship. Sometimes the husband takes the first step. Sometimes that's Passover. Sometimes the wife takes the first step. That's Rosh Hashanah. And sometimes they do things together, and that is Shavuot. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the Jewish holidays. We still have a lot to go, but that's the big picture. So if you walk away with this alone, and every time for the next 100 years, every time you go to the Passover Seder, you look up and you see a full moon and you say, now I know what the full moon is about. Now I can expect the spring is coming. God is going to inspire me. It's going to be amazing. And then when you go to shul on Rosh Hashanah, you go to dinner on Rosh Hashanah, and you look up and you say, no moon. Where's the moon? You say, there's no moon. God is waiting for me to call him. I have to inspire myself. Don't wait for the inspiration to come from above. And of course, Shavuot is the partnership. We prepare, but God is the one who gives us the Torah. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor. If anybody wants to share, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, we continue in our discussion of the holidays and everything related to that.
That's the first time I ever heard that.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I say it all. I think a lot of people here heard it before because I say it every year because it's too sweet not to say.
No one has ever mentioned the relationship between point out the shape of the moon to the holidays and what it means. I've never heard that before.
I'm glad you enjoyed. Wonderful. Okay, next point. Let me see if I can get some. Okay, next point. When you look at the holidays in the Torah, there are two reasons and two rationales given to the holidays. When you look at this week's Parsha, it's basically about agriculture. The holiday of Passover is the holiday of the spring, Aviv. Literally in Hebrew, the word Aviv means that the grain is ready. That's what the word Aviv means. The grain, the seed, the grain is ready within the stalk. That's what we celebrate on Passover. Shavuot is the harvest, the time where we cut the grain, we conclude the cutting of the grain. And then Sukkot, at the end of the summer, is Chag HaAsif, the time when we gather in all the fruit, all the produce, and we bring it into the storehouse for the winter. You see, because back then there's no refrigeration, so what they would do is they would actually dry whatever could be dried. You dry all the fruit that you can. And the Hebrew word for kayitz actually means dried fruit. That's what the word means. So what we're doing is, after the kayitz, that's what we celebrate. Now, that's one track. And that's not anything unique to Judaism, right? Because every culture, every ancient culture, holidays connected to the harvest, right? That's nothing new for Judaism. So in fact, okay, not to talk against people, but even when you talk about the very anti-religious kibbutzim in Israel, they of course celebrate all the holidays. But what they highlight is the agricultural angle. We celebrate Passover as the grain is ready. We celebrate Shavuot, the harvest, and finally Sukkot, the ingathering. No mention of God, no mention of miracle, no mention of Torah. So that's one track, and that's what we have in this week's Parsha. Then you look at the book of Deuteronomy, and you look at Deuteronomy, and you see that there's a different theme to the holidays. Passover is no longer the holiday of the spring; it's the holiday of God took us out of Egypt. And then Sukkot is also to commemorate the exodus of Egypt. So all of a sudden, we have a different theme. Not only is it a different theme, it's actually almost an opposing theme, because the theme of the holidays, of the harvest, is nature, and the theme of that the Torah is talking about the miracles is actually supernatural. It's basically saying we're not celebrating nature, we're celebrating the ability of nature to be changed, unexpected things to happen. So what exactly are we doing? Couldn't the Torah make up? So I'm sitting on Passover. What am I supposed to be thinking about? Am I supposed to be thinking about the produce in the field? In other words, the harvest. In other words, the agricultural cycle. Or am I supposed to be thinking about of God performing miracles? Which one is it? Seems like a conflict. And the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, that the whole point of the holidays is to show that there is no conflict. In other words, the whole point of the holidays is to show is that both nature and the suspension of nature both come from the same source, both come from God. So in other words, Judaism is not about saying, well, there's a natural cycle and then God comes in and if he wants, he could make some changes. No, what we're saying is that within nature, we see the same force of the miraculous. And this is a very important point because we're talking about joy comes from gratitude, comes from celebration. You have to not take things for granted. But nature, we take nature for granted. We expect it to happen. But if you could see the miracle in nature, if you could see that the fact that the earth gives its produce and the fact that the earth is putting out the flowers is actually a miracle. It's just that it happens every day, so we're used to it. So if you could be able to see the miraculous in the natural, then you live at that. Then you're always excited. And what happens is that's exactly what the Jewish holidays are doing. We're saying every holiday has a double theme. Every holiday has a theme of the natural, but also of the mysterious and the miraculous. And they're not contradictions, because both the natural and the miraculous are really one and the same. They both come from God. Nature itself is miraculous. And if that's the case, those two themes now are not two separate themes. They're actually one and the same. And that is a beautiful concept. So these two themes of the holidays are not contradictory. In fact, they are complementary. They help each other. Okay, let's talk about the mitzvah of counting the Omer, counting the 7 weeks that lead up to Shavuot. So even before we go there, it's actually interesting that this is a problem. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that Shavuot is the holiday that the Torah was given. It doesn't say it. It just says count 7 weeks, and on 49 days, and on the 50th day, make a celebration, make a natzeret, make a celebration. It does not say so. It doesn't say explicitly that Shavuot is the holiday that we got the Torah, which is very puzzling. Why isn't the date given explicitly in the Torah? Now, we know that that's the case. We have the tradition and we derive it, so we know that Shavuot was given, that we know that Shavuot, this holiday of weeks, is really the holiday of the giving of the Torah. But why the name holiday of weeks? So this is an interesting problem. And there's a fascinating answer that comes from the Kli Yakar, who is the great-grandfather of Pam, who I think is on the call. So thank you, Kli Yakar, for that. And he says something fascinating. He says that the Torah does not want to emphasize that there's a date on the calendar when we got the Torah. Because when we study Torah, the proper attitude is that when we're studying the Torah, there's a giving of the Torah every day. Every morning before we start studying the Torah, there is a blessing that we say. We thank God for giving us the Torah. And the language that we use in that blessing is Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, Lord, Notein HaTorah, the one giving the Torah. So we don't say in the past tense, thank you, God, for giving us the Torah. We say it in the present tense because God is giving us the Torah at every moment. In other words, every time you open the book and you read the words of the Torah, the attitude is supposed to be, and that's the truth, that God is communicating to you right now. So if you say, well, amazing, we have one day that we celebrate the giving of the Torah, that takes away from the fact that every day is the giving of the Torah. Every day there's a revelation. Every time you study Torah, it's your giving of the Torah. God is speaking to you. That's parenthetically why it's not named. But we know that there's 7 weeks, and we count 7 weeks, and the 7 weeks are preparation for the giving of the Torah. So what's happening here? What exact Kabbalistic soul powers, and we've discussed them over the past couple of weeks. And the Kabbalah says very simple: we leave Egypt, we're not ready to receive the Torah. So what do we have to do? We have to refine ourselves. That's why we need 7 weeks. Every week we focus on one soul power and we try to refine it and align it with its source within God and purify it and make it shine. In fact, the Hebrew word for counting, sphira, usfartem lachem, you should count for yourself. So the word lispor comes from the same word as sapphire, sapphire. And the word sapphire comes from the word to shine. So what does it mean? Count 7 weeks is shine 7 weeks. Make the 7 weeks within yourself. Make the 7 soul powers shine. So imagine you have a diamond and the diamond is covered in earth. So what you have to do is you have to peel off, take away the mud. And when you take away the mud, the stone starts to shine. And similarly, that's what's happening. We all have 7 soul powers that are pure and holy. Problem is, some of them are misdirected and misaligned. And then when we count, we purify, we align it with its spiritual source, then we are ready for the giving of the Torah. This is what we did in the past, the first year when we left Egypt, and we do the same every year when we count the Omer. Every night we count one soul power within the soul power of that week, 49 days, 7 times 7. As you could see in the prayer books. Wonderful. There's a fascinating, beautiful concept here. And say, what's really the problem? The problem here is as follows. The problem is that Passover, there was a revelation from above. We're sitting in Passover. We're sitting in Egypt. And God inspires us. And if you think about inspiration, what happens is often, I'll speak for myself, you could be walking down the street and you get very inspired out of the blue. And when you get very inspired out of the blue, it's wonderful. But the problem is that usually that inspiration doesn't last. Here today, gone tomorrow. I get inspired. I'm going to be the best person. I'm going to be the most patient person. I'm going to be the best parent, best spouse. boom, tomorrow I'm back to my own old patterns. What happened? Why is it that the inspiration cannot change me? That's a great frustration. I'm inspired, I want to change, it doesn't happen. Why not? So the answer is that not that the inspiration wasn't genuine. The inspiration was indeed genuine. The problem was that the inspiration only touched part of me. That's my godly soul, right? According to Judaism, we have two souls, and one is selfless, one is transcendent, one is a spark of God, but then there's the side of self that's more animalistic, self-oriented, not really interested in transcendence. And there's always a battle between these two souls. And when I'm inspired, what happens is my godly soul feels the inspiration and decides it wants to change. It wants to change course. It wants to improve. Where's my animal soul? My animal soul is asleep. It's not here. It didn't show up. It wasn't inspired. And therefore, when the animal soul wakes up again, the animal soul wakes up and starts pulling me back to its old patterns. And the inspiration is gone because the animal is stronger than the human. The animal soul is stronger than the godly urge within ourselves. So that's why the inspiration doesn't last. Not because it's not genuine, but because it doesn't encompass all of us. So now what's the job? The job now is you have to go and you have to actually inspire the animal soul. Forget about the godly soul. The godly soul has been inspired on Passover. Now you have to inspire the animal soul. And that takes time. But when you do so, then the inspiration lasts. And now I'm going to share a little Hasidic discourse based on a verse in the Song of Songs, which we studied the first time when we were literally, this was way back when, I'm not going to mention the year, I will. 1995, we were 13 years old, and we studied this Hasidic discourse, and I'll never forget it. It's absolutely fascinating. So it's based on a verse in the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs is, if you don't know, Song of Songs is one of the books of the Bible. It's in the writings, and it's a song that describes, it's basically a love story between a girl and a man. It's not clear who the girl is, who the man is. It's written in metaphor. Very full of love, it's very erotic, and there's a lot of yearning, and there's a lot of, it's an interesting book. You wouldn't expect it to be in the Bible. You expect it to be in the library, but not in the Bible. You would expect it to be in the fiction aisle or in the romance aisle, but not in the Bible. But that's what happens. It's in the Bible. It's made its way into the Bible. Rabbi Akiva says, if all books of the Torah are holy, the Song of Songs is a holy of holies. So not only it belongs in the Bible, but it's actually, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's actually deeper, holier than all the other parts of the Bible. So it's basically a love story, and all love stories work the same. When he's in the mood, she's not in the mood. When she's not in the mood, he's not in the mood. And it just tracks this relationship. It has eight chapters, and it's fascinating stuff. Read it when you have a chance. So just verse 4 in this verse 4, this fourth verse in this Song of Songs reads as follows. She says, Mashcheni acharecha, pull me after you, and we will run. And then it concludes, the king has brought me to his chamber. So now we think maybe the man is a king, maybe he's not, it's not clear. Okay, but let's first focus on the first two words. What's happening here is Mashcheni acharecha. Draw me after you, pull me after you, and we will run. So what does it mean? Simply, it means that the girl tells the man, pull me after you, and we will run together. Who's we? Both the girl and the man. Okay, fine. The Kabbalists say, listen, this story, this verse itself captures the holidays of Passover, then the counting of the Omer, and then Shavuot. So what happens is, on Passover, we turn to God and we say, Mashcheni acharecha, pull me after you. Because I mentioned earlier, what did the Jews do on Passover? They did nothing. They were not prepared. They were not spiritually in tune to God. It's just that God came and pulled the people out of Egypt. So God did all the heavy lifting. Then after Passover, however, the Jewish people now start counting, start preparing, start refining themselves. So now it's, we will run. Who's we? Also the Jewish people. And finally, the end of the verse, Haviani HaMelech Hadarav, God has brought me to, the king has brought me to his chamber. That's where you have this unity between bride and groom. So he says that's the giving of the Torah. Because what's the giving of the Torah? The giving of the Torah is the place where there's intimacy between God and the Jewish people. We understand and unite with God through the Torah. So that is, the Medrash already makes this point, that this verse is divided into three. Pull me after you is Passover. We will run is preparing for the giving of the Torah, where we're also running, the people are also preparing. And finally, God brought me to his chamber is Shavuot, the holiday of the Torah, when we get to the Torah. So that's the outline of the Medrash. Now, what does the Kabbalah add? Kabbalah adds something fascinating. Kabbalah says that this verse tells us a lot about what we need to know about the nature of the godly soul and the animal soul. So first of all, Mashcheni, Passover comes as a divine inspiration. The people say, pull me. Pull me is in the singular. Who's being pulled? Only the godly soul, not the animal soul. Only the spiritual side of self is being pulled. The physical side of self, the self-oriented side of self is asleep. It's not being pulled. Then what happens, the next clause is Narutza, we will run. And here is the big deal. We will run. Who's the we? We doesn't refer to the man and the girl. We refers to both parts of the girl, both the godly soul and the animal soul. Because now the point of this counting is to get the animal soul involved in the quest to come close to God. That's the we will run. Okay, point one. And here's the big point. The big point is that, ladies and gentlemen, the godly soul doesn't know how to run. Doesn't know how to run. It can walk, it can't run. If you ever see a very intellectual person, okay, they're very smart, they got it all figured out, they can do advanced mathematics, but there's no passion. They're not going to run anywhere. Everything is cool and calm and collected because the mind is cool, calm, and collected. The emotional person, whatever he wants, he runs. If he wants something, he runs completely. So the animal doesn't walk, the animal runs. Right? My animal soul, the destructive force within myself, if I want to eat that full chocolate cake, I'm not walking to the store. I'm running to the store. Not literally, but figuratively. The godly soul, yeah, wants to study, wants to do the right thing. It's happy to walk and go somewhere. There's no running. There's no passion. That intense passion is the domain of the animal soul. So now it's a fascinating concept. In the 7 weeks when we're counting the Omer, what are we doing? We're trying to get the animal soul to come close to God as well. We try to teach it that what's really enjoyable is spirituality. We try to get it to run. Because the animal soul doesn't walk, it only runs. Now, what happens here now is that it says we will run in plural. What does that mean? That the animal soul teaches the godly soul how to run. The godly soul teaches the animal soul how to direct its passion from being destructive to come close to God. But it's a two-way relationship. The animal soul teaches the godly soul how to run, because naturally the godly soul doesn't run anywhere. It's too intellectual. But when they have this relation, when they have this unity, and the godly soul talks to the animal soul and says, wow, there's something so great. It's called connecting to God. It's called transcendence. And transcendence is actually the biggest pleasure. The biggest high you can get is not from eating a chocolate bar, which just leaves you with a stomachache. The biggest high you can get is transcending yourself. And once the animal soul experiences that, and the animal soul's running to it. It doesn't walk to it, it runs to it. And that passion then spills over to the godly soul. So let's revisit the verse. Mashcheni acharecha, draw me after you, is the godly soul talking to God. He says, God, please send me some inspiration. I feel oppressed here. The inspiration comes, and then what happens? But the inspiration only affects the animal soul. I'm sorry, it only affects the spiritual side of self. Now it's my job to start counting. And we said that counting means start refining, start shining, start aligning the godly soul with its source, the animal soul with its source. Now I have to get the selfish part of self on board and try to take its passion and direct it to the holy. And now it starts running. And then what happens? Then the godly soul also learns to run. And the godly soul's passion itself is also intensified. And instead of it being just cool, calm, and collected, now its relationship with God is full of passion, and it could run. And if it can run, it could achieve far more. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is what the Kabbalah says about the 4th verse of the Shir HaShirim of the Song of Songs, and how it aligns with the holidays, and how it aligns with the inner workings of the soul, where part of us has the right perspective, but doesn't have the drive, or doesn't run anywhere, it doesn't have the intense passion and drive. Part of us has intense passion and drive, but it sometimes runs right into the wall because it's not directed. And the point of running toward the king, running toward the man, running toward our relationship is that there has to be some synchronization between the two, where the godly soul teaches the animal soul where to run to, and the animal soul teaches the godly soul how to run. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. If anybody wants to share or ask or share or contradict it now.